The phone rang just as I was buttering a slice of toast. That old rotary clunker on the kitchen wall, its mechanical buzz slicing through the stillness of the morning. Most people had tossed these relics years ago, but I kept mine. Pearl always said it had character, like the creaking floorboards in the hallway or the chipped porcelain sink she'd refused to replace. It made the house feel lived in, she said. Real. I set the knife down, wiped my hands on a dish towel and answered, "Hello." There was a pause, a familiar one, the kind that always came before trouble. "Dad," it was Ebner, my son. His voice sounded tight, like he was already halfway done with the conversation. "Good morning, son." I tried to keep it light. The words came out slower than I'd intended. Mornings had become quieter over the years, and talking felt like shaking off sleep. "Listen," he said, not waiting for a reply. "It's my birthday this Saturday." "I remember," I said, although in truth I'd forgotten. Not the date, just the significance. Somewhere between losing Pearl and losing touch with my own children, birthdays had faded into the background. "We're having a family dinner. Ernestina thinks you should be there." That was a lie. Ernestina didn't think anything of the sort. In fact, I was certain she'd prefer if I stayed far away from her curated, magazine-ready life. Still, I played along. "Of course, 43 is a big year." 44, Dad." "Ah, time slips by faster every year, doesn't it?" There was a silence on the line, not the awkward kind, the loaded kind. He wanted to end the call but didn't want to be the one hanging up first. "You'll be there at 6. "Wouldn't miss it." "Good." And just like that, he was gone. I stood there with the phone still in my hand, a cold slice of toast congealing on the plate. The kitchen felt different somehow, emptier. Something in his voice lingered, something I couldn't place. Not exactly hostility, but not warmth either. An edge. I'd heard it before, always when there was something else going on beneath the surface. Ebner didn't just want a family dinner. He wanted something more. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and sat by the window. Outside, Castleton was shaking off the last stubborn threads of winter. The sky was caught between gray and blue, like it couldn't decide whether to sulk or shine. A few early robins hopped along the lawn, tugging at the thawing soil. The town looked the same. Same cracked sidewalks, same crooked mailboxes, same leaning trees that Pearl always said gave our street its charm. But something had changed. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the world. I sipped the coffee. It had gone lukewarm. The idea of a birthday dinner didn't bother me, not really. What unsettled me was the context. The last 3 gatherings had ended in thinly veiled interventions. My house was too much for one man. My health was a concern. And the latest, Sunview Place, had excellent reviews and weekly bingo nights. Ebner was relentless in that way. Polished, composed, but with a knife always hidden just beneath the cloth napkin. Ernestina played the soft voice of reason. "We're just worried, Ward. That house is old. It's isolating. You deserve better." Better, as if the memories in those walls were disposable. I knew what they really wanted, the house. 4 bedrooms, double lot, Elm Street location, prime real estate. I'd built it myself, every nail and board for Pearl. Now it was just another asset in my son's portfolio of ambitions. That call was the first domino. And I already felt the whole damn thing falling. The rest of that day passed in a quiet fog. After the call, I tried to return to my breakfast, but my appetite had vanished. The toast sat cold and uneaten on the plate, the butter hardening into a pale crust. Instead, I wandered the house. It's funny how a place can feel so full and so empty at the same time. Every corner whispered reminders. The creak in the 3rd stair, where Toby once hid from his parents during hide and seek. The worn groove in the hallway floorboard from Pearl's rocking chair. The faint lavender scent that still clung to the upstairs linen closet. I climbed the stairs slower than I used to, My knees didn't take kindly to sudden ambition anymore, and made my way to the bedroom. Ours, still. I never changed the name. The closet door groaned open, same as always. Pearl's clothes were still there. Not all of them, but the ones that mattered. The ones she wore on warm evenings, sitting on the porch with a book in her lap. The ones that still made her feel close. I reached out and touched one of the dresses. A faded yellow cotton thing, soft as memory. My fingers lingered on the fabric, then pulled away, as if afraid it would vanish under too much pressure. My suit was still hanging there too. The one I'd worn to her funeral. Navy blue, slightly too loose now. Grief and time had taken more weight from me than any diet ever could. I tried it on. The jacket sagged on my shoulders, the pants held in place by a belt cinched too tight. I looked like a kid playing dress-up in his father's clothes. Pearl would have laughed. "Ward," she'd say, "you look like Farmer Higgins' scarecrow." The thought made me smile, a rare thing these days. I carefully took it off, folded it back over the hanger, and returned it to its solemn place in the closet. I'd wear something else, something less ceremonial. The rest of the afternoon dragged. I spent it in the garden, pulling weeds, checking the soil, debating whether this was the year I tried broccoli again. Pearl had loved it, and Lydia, bless her, had inherited her taste for the stuff. The boys, not so much. But Lydia, she'd eat it straight off the stalk if I let her. By 3 o'clock I was back inside, made a ham sandwich, turned on the radio naturally. The host droned on about a scandal in the Capitol. I didn't care, never had much faith in politics. Always seemed like too many people in suits pretending they weren't lying. I sat down in the living room under that framed photo of Pearl and me by Lake Champlain, our last trip. She was still healthy then, though neither of us knew for how long. I closed my eyes for just a moment, maybe 2. When I opened them it was 4:00. Time to get moving. I showered slowly, shaved, picked out a brown plaid shirt Pearl had given me one Christmas along with a pair of slacks, comfortable, familiar. I decided against a tie. Ebner would find fault no matter what I wore. By 5 I was ready. Too early to leave, too late to start anything else. So I sat by the front window, Pearl's chair. She'd sit there every evening, knitting or reading or just watching the street. Sometimes I imagined she was still there, just in another room, and I'd forgotten where. Out the window, kids played in the yard across the street. Their laughter echoed down the block, a sound that always made this place feel alive. I remembered when my own kids had played there. Willow with her quiet intensity, always organizing things. Ebner, loud, impatient, always trying to bend the world to his will. Back then he was just a boy. Now he had his own kids, his own house, his own plans, and I was just a guest in all of it. At 6:15 I locked the door and walked out to the car. My old Ford groaned but started on the 3rd try, same as always. Ebner had mocked it for years. "Scrap metal, Dad," he'd say. "One day it's going to collapse under its own rust." But it never had. Unlike people, machines were loyal when taken care of. The drive to his house took about 20 minutes. His neighborhood was new, shiny, uniform, too clean somehow, like a brochure nobody really lived in. The houses looked like they'd been cut from the same template, stamped into the earth by some god of planned communities. No creaky floorboards here, no ghosts, just cold efficiency. His house was 2 stories of red brick and white trim, complete with ornamental columns that screamed, "Look at me." I made it. I pulled up behind a silver van that had to be Willow's. She was already here. That settled the knot in my chest, just a little. At least there'd be one person in the room who didn't look at me like a problem to be solved. I turned off the engine and sat in silence for a moment, staring at the front door. Then I got out of the car. My knees popped as I stood. I reached into the backseat and took out the small gift I'd brought, my father's silver cufflinks. Ebner would never wear them, probably didn't even own a shirt that needed them. But they were a tradition, and I was still clinging to those. The door opened before I even knocked. And there she was. Lydia, all dimples and wild hair and missing teeth. "Grandpa," she squealed and launched herself into my arms. And for the first time that day, I felt something warm in my chest that wasn't just the residue of loss. Lydia's hug was fierce, tight little arms around my neck, her weight pressing against my chest like she was trying to anchor me to something real. I held her close for a moment longer than I probably should have, breathing in that sweet, slightly dusty scent of childhood. "You're getting too big for this, young lady," I said, ruffling her hair. "Nah," she grinned, "I'm still your only granddaughter." "That makes you my favorite," I whispered, and she giggled like it was a secret. She led me inside by the hand, all smiles and bouncing steps, and for a moment it almost felt like I belonged there. The house was sterile, too perfect. The hallway was wide and clean, smelling of lemon cleaner and something warm, apple pie maybe. No scuffed baseboards, no cluttered corners, no sign that children lived there besides Lydia's tiny shoes lined up like soldiers by the front door. Voices floated in from the living room. Laughter, glasses clinking. The kind of polite chaos that builds before a dinner, not quite genuine but loud enough to cover silence. I took off my jacket and hung it on a brass hook shaped like a leaf. Even their coat hooks were trying too hard. "Grandpa, want to see my new tooth?" Lydia chirped, already pulling at her bottom lip. "It's gone, look." I bent down to inspect the gap. "Has the tooth fairy been by?" "Dad says tooth fairies aren't real." "Dad say a lot of silly things," I replied. "Dad, stop filling her head with fairy tales." Ebner's voice cut through the moment like a cold wind. He stood in the living room doorway, tall and trim in one of those wrinkle-free shirts that never look lived in. The gray in his hair had spread since last I saw him, but the sharpness in his eyes hadn't dulled. "Hello, Father, right on time." He said it like it surprised him. "Happy birthday, son," I said, offering the small wrapped box. He took it without looking at me. "Thanks," he mumbled, already turning back into the room. I followed him. The living room was filled with people, familiar but distant. Willow and her husband Dexter were there, both looking up as I entered. Willow smiled and got up immediately, walking over to hug me. She smelled like jasmine and warmth and something else, maybe kindness. "Papa," she said, and there was real light in her eyes. "You look good." "That's a lie but a sweet one," I replied. Dexter shook my hand, firm grip, honest. "Good to see you again, Mr. Lamston." "You too, son." I nodded to the other guests, a few of Ebner's business friends, a neighbor couple, all dressed neatly, all polite, all looking at me like a museum exhibit. "Oh look, it's the old man who refuses to sell his house." I sat in the armchair offered to me near the corner. Strategic placement, I realized, out of the way but visible, present but peripheral. Then she appeared. Ernestina. My daughter-in-law walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel like a surgeon finishing prep. She looked polished, not beautiful but carefully arranged. Hair tied tight, apron unwrinkled, smile polite, eyes unreadable. "Ward," she said, "never dad, never father, always just Ward, like I was an accountant who used to work for them." "Thanks for coming." "Thanks for having me," I replied, accepting the wine glass she offered. I didn't drink much these days, but this was the kind of evening where refusing anything would raise eyebrows. We chatted, small talk, weather, traffic, how's the garden, still getting around okay, meaningless questions with loaded undertones. No one really wanted to know, they just wanted to hear if I'd give up my house yet. Dinner was soon called. The dining room table looked like it had been lifted from a catalog. Candles, centerpiece, linen napkins folded into impossible shapes. I took my seat next to Lydia, across from Ebner and Ernestina. Toby, their 14-year-old, slouched into the room late, eyes glued to his phone. He grunted when I said hello. I grunted back. We understood each other. The meal was fine. Roast duck expertly cooked. Ernestina's apple pie, too perfect to be homemade. The conversation floated around work, kids, politics, the economy, everything except what we were really thinking. I knew the pitch was coming. I could feel it in the way Ebner avoided my gaze, the way Ernestina kept glancing at him, like they were waiting for a cue. Even Willow looked uneasy, glancing between them like a referee at a silent match. After the main course it came. Ebner stood up, glass in hand. "Before we cut the cake," he said, "I want to share some news." Everyone turned. My stomach sank. "My company's been offered a contract with Royal Comfort Hotels. Big deal. Huge opportunity." Polite applause, murmurs of "that's great." "Only catch," he continued, "we need to expand, which means new equipment, new space, investment. The bank approved a loan, but..." And there it was. "They need collateral, more than we can offer." His eyes landed on me like a pin dropping on glass. "Dad, we've been thinking about your house." I stared at him. The fork in my hand froze. "It's just too big for you now. Hard to maintain. You're far from everyone. We worry." It was rehearsed, scripted. The words coded in care, but underneath they were sharp and surgical. "I'm fine," I said. "Of course," he said, smiling that condescending smile that makes your blood rise. "But wouldn't you be better in Sunview Place? It's got medical staff, community, swimming pool." "I don't want a swimming pool," I said quietly. "It's not just about you, Dad," he said, the mask slipping. "We're thinking about everyone." Everyone meaning him, his business, his future. I glanced at Willow. Her expression was tight, disapproving. "Maybe we can talk about this another time," she said. But Ebner pressed on. "It's a win-win, Dad. You'll be safer. We'll secure our future. Isn't that what Mom would have wanted?" That did it. I gripped the edge of the table. "Don't you dare speak for your mother." The room went silent. Ernestina, ever the peacemaker, chimed in softly, "It's for your own good." I looked around at the faces, most of them avoiding my eyes. I felt like a man already halfway erased. And somewhere at the edge of my awareness, a thought whispered, "He's not done yet, and neither am I." The silence at the table stretched like a tight rope, the kind you walk across with your pride dangling beneath you. Every eye in the room was suddenly interested in the centerpiece or the folds of their napkins. "I'm not moving," I said, keeping my voice low but the steel in it unmistakable. "This house you're so eager to liquidate, I built it, with my own hands, for Pearl. It's not for sale." Ebner's jaw clenched. "No one said anything about selling it out from under you." "Didn't you?" I said, "because I think I heard that suggestion, buried right under all your concern." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a sip of wine, composed himself, and said in that polished businessman voice of his, "This isn't about control, Dad. It's about reality. You're 69. 68, I interrupted. "You're 69. You forgot your own birthday again this year." I felt something tighten in my chest, not from age, from rage. I hadn't forgotten. I just didn't want to mark another year alone in that big, quiet house. "And what would you have me do?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Move to Sunview, sell the house, and what? Hand you the check?" Ebner shook his head with mock surprise. "Why would you say that?" "Because I've seen this play before, son. You want my home, my collateral, my compliance, wrapped up with a ribbon of family love." He glanced at Ernestina, who gave him the smallest nod. That was all it took. "I've already spoken to Sunview," he admitted, letting the truth surface. "There's a room ready, 2-bedroom, corner unit, top floor. They even have a greenhouse. You'd like that." So it was already arranged, decided. They weren't asking, they were telling. You planned this without speaking to me. We knew you'd resist. We were hoping if you saw how nice it was. You mean after you poisoned the conversation with guilt, I said, rising from my seat. My chair scraped hard against the polished floor. You're not worried about me. You're worried I'll live long enough to be inconvenient. Ernestina gasped quietly. Willow closed her eyes. Dad, please, Willow said. Let's not do this here. I turned to her, pain flickering beneath my frustration. You too. No, she said firmly. I don't want you to sell the house, but I do think maybe there's a better place for you than being alone. That's all. I appreciated her honesty, even if I didn't agree. It was more than I was getting from her brother. Ebner stood now too. You always think I'm out to take something from you. You are, I said. You just wear a suit when you do it. He laughed bitterly. And what do you want, Dad? To die alone in that dusty mausoleum with a portrait of Pearl watching over you? I stepped forward, chest to chest. For a moment the room dissolved. No guests, no decorations, just me and the boy I'd raised, staring each other down like two men on opposite sides of a battlefield. What I want, I said, my voice low and trembling, is to be treated like a human being, not a pawn in your next investment. The table remained frozen. Even Toby had looked up from his phone, eyes wide and blinking. Ernestina cleared her throat gently. Ward, maybe it's best if you take some time. Just consider all options. I turned to her slowly. You mean wait 2 weeks so the bank doesn't revoke the contract, and you get what you want without the inconvenience of open conflict? She didn't reply. Ebner placed his hands flat on the table, his fingers spread. This is happening, Dad, one way or another. That was it. That was the moment I realized my son had stopped seeing me as a father. Somewhere along the way I'd become a hurdle, a delay, a problem with paperwork attached. Willow finally spoke, gently but firmly. Ebner, stop, this isn't how we do things. But it was, and everyone at the table knew it. The rest of the night passed in shadow. No more grand declarations, no more toasts. The cake was cut with an undercurrent of silence. Everyone smiled, but their eyes were somewhere else. I nibbled at a slice I couldn't taste. And when Ebner lifted his glass again, announcing, "To new beginnings," I raised mine too, but I didn't drink. Instead, I watched him closely, just in time to see him reach, not for his own drink, but for mine. A twitch, a movement, subtle, almost imperceptible. But I saw it. And suddenly, everything became crystal clear. I didn't blink, didn't twitch, just kept my hand near the glass while my eyes followed Ebner's fingers. They brushed the stem lightly like he was adjusting it, but there was no need to adjust. The table hadn't moved. The glass hadn't moved. Only he had. He pulled his hand back slowly, casually. But to me, it might as well have been a flashing siren. The motion was too deliberate to be innocent, too rehearsed to be a coincidence. He didn't glance at me afterward. That was the giveaway. He should have looked at me, should have made some comment, nudged me to drink something. But he didn't. He was waiting for me to raise the glass. I brought it to my lips slowly, pretending to take a sip. The wine touched nothing. I tilted it just enough to create the illusion. Then I set it back down. He smiled, a small, satisfied curl at the edge of his mouth, like a child who'd pulled a prank and was waiting for the chaos to unfold. I'd seen that smile before. The same one he wore when he dropped frogs into Willow's backpack, when he swapped the sugar for salt at Christmas, when he let the dog loose in the school parking lot. Mischief, veiled in charm. But this wasn't a prank. It was premeditated humiliation. And it almost worked. The room buzzed with safe conversation again. Ernestina passed around dessert plates. Willow talked about her upcoming trip to Europe. Toby slouched deeper into his chair, occasionally laughing at something on his phone. The scene returned to normal. But my mind didn't. What had he put in the drink? A sedative? No, too dangerous. A laxative, most likely. Just enough to make me sprint to the bathroom mid-toast. Enough to paint me as a frail old man in need of supervision. A harmless accident, followed by subtle nods and see, he's not well. It was calculated. And the more I thought about it, the colder I became inside. I looked at my glass, then at Ernestina's, still half full and sitting to my left. She'd gotten up to fetch more dessert forks. The timing was perfect. A thought entered my mind. At first I dismissed it. Too petty. Too cruel. But then I remembered the bank. The Sunview brochures on the kitchen counter. The forced smiles. The fact that she, more than Ebner, had been pushing this narrative for years, always dressed in concern. I looked around. Everyone was busy. The neighbor across the table was telling a story about fishing, something about a trout that snapped the line just as he was pulling it in. Hands waved in the air describing the size. People laughed. No one was watching me. I switched the glasses. Quick, clean, without hesitation. Ernestina came back, smiling politely as she sat down, unaware of the change. She raised her glass during the next toast, to family, and drank deeply. I raised mine, mimicking her, and took a small sip, just enough to keep the illusion alive. Whatever Ebner had planned, it was already set in motion. Now we would see where his loyalties truly lay. The next 15 minutes were a waiting game. I smiled. I nodded. I even complimented the duck. I played the part of the aging father who hadn't noticed a thing. But I watched Ernestina carefully. At first, nothing. Then a shift. Her expression changed barely. A hand to her stomach. A small swallow, her back stiffened. She blinked slowly like she was trying to focus. Willow noticed first. "Ernestina, you all right?" Ernestina nodded quickly, too quickly. "Just a bit, maybe the wine. Or the pie someone offered, it's rich." She waved them off. "I'm fine." But I saw it, the way her hand clenched slightly at the edge of the table, her eyes darting to the hallway. Her breathing changed. A small gasp escaped her lips. She stood. Suddenly, abruptly. "Excuse me," she whispered, knocking over her glass as she turned. The room fell silent as she disappeared down the hallway. No one spoke for a long moment. Then the neighbor awkwardly offered, "Must be something she ate." Ebner stood. His face had gone pale. "I'll check on her," he said, already walking toward the hallway. I stayed seated, sipping my wine. The conversation picked up again, forced and awkward. Small talk about traffic and school closings. Someone mentioned the weather. But I was elsewhere. What had I done? I hadn't wanted to hurt her, not really. But I had wanted Ebner to feel it, to taste his own trap. A glass for a glass. Humiliation for humiliation. But as the minutes passed, the weight of it sank in. What if it was too much? What if the dosage was more than expected? My fingers tapped anxiously on the base of the wine glass. Pearl's voice echoed somewhere in my memory. "You're not cruel, Ward. You're stubborn, but never cruel." Was I now? I heard movement behind me. Ebner returned, his face tight, mouth drawn. "She's not coming back to the table," he said quietly. "She's not well." I nodded solemnly. "That's unfortunate. I hope it wasn't something serious." His eyes narrowed. "Everyone else is fine." "True," I said, looking directly at him. "Must be an isolated case." He stared at me for a long time. And then I saw it, that flicker of understanding, confusion, doubt. He didn't know what had gone wrong, but he knew something had. He couldn't prove it. But he knew. He returned to his seat. The rest of the evening passed in tired murmurs. One by one the guests made polite excuses and left. The laughter was thinner now. The smiles forced. I stayed seated, until Willow offered to walk me out. In the driveway, she turned to me and said softly, "What's going on, Dad?" I looked at her, at the worry in her eyes. And I lied. "Nothing, sweetheart, just a long night." Behind us, the front door opened. Ebner stepped out. His face no longer polite, no longer composed. Just angry. Just confused. He walked up to the car, leaned in close and whispered, "What did you do?" Ebner's voice was sharp, barely above a whisper, but it cut through the night air like a knife. "What did you do?" I kept my face calm, but inside, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "What are you talking about, son?" He leaned closer, eyes wild with a mixture of anger and fear. "Don't play dumb. Ernestina, she's been sick all night. Locked herself in the bathroom, turning inside out. I know you put something in her glass." I took a slow breath, steadying myself. I didn't touch her drink, and I certainly didn't poison anyone. Willow stepped between us, her hands out in peace. "Ebner, stop. Dad wouldn't do something like that." He glared at her. "You don't know what I know." His accusation hung heavy between us. I felt a cold weight settle in my chest, heavier than any old age or sickness. Was this the son I'd raised, or a stranger wearing my son's face? "Ebner," I said quietly, "I switched glasses. You put something in mine. What was meant for me ended up in Ernestina's glass instead." He shook his head as if unable to believe it. "You're delusional." "No," I said, voice firmer now. "I'm tired of being your pawn. Your humiliation won't happen, not today." He pulled back, anger shifting into confusion. "Why would you do that? Why retaliate?" "Because I had to. You wanted to show everyone I'm helpless, that I can't be trusted. I had to prove you wrong." Willow looked from one of us to the other, her face full of sorrow and disbelief. "This isn't us," she whispered. Ebner's eyes darkened, and for a moment I thought he'd say something terrible. But instead, he turned and stormed back inside. Willow stayed behind, looking at me with a mixture of love and sadness. "I'm worried about you, Dad, about all of us." I nodded, swallowing a lump in my throat. "So am I." The house felt colder when I returned inside. The weight of betrayal was thick in the air, heavier than any loneliness. Later that night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence that used to be filled with Pearl's soft breathing. I thought about what I'd done, about the lines I'd crossed. Was it worth it, the price I'd paid? Ebner had crossed lines too. Forgery, manipulation, deception. The house, the money, the trust, all under siege. I was a man pushed to the edge, but still standing. And I knew this battle was far from over. The morning light seeped weakly through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. I sat at the old desk in the study, the room that had once been the nursery, now a shrine to memories and dusty papers. My fingers trembled slightly as I sifted through unopened mail and forgotten envelopes. It wasn't just bills or junk. There were letters from the bank, notices, and official documents. Things I hadn't touched in months, maybe years. Among the stacks, one envelope caught my eye. It bore the seal of the First National Bank of Castleton, the very place where my son had applied for that business loan. My heart sank. I tore it open carefully and pulled out a quarterly mortgage report. Everything looked routine, payments up to date, no late fees. But then my eyes caught the footnote about an additional loan, taken out a month ago, guaranteed by me. Guarantee. I had no memory of signing anything new. I rifled through more letters and found scanned copies of loan documents. My eyes froze on the signature. It was mine, or a poor imitation. The jagged strokes, the shaky loops, nothing like the handwriting I'd practiced for decades. Ebner had forged my name. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Not a mere act of desperation, but a calculated crime. A betrayal. I felt nausea rise in my throat, dizziness cloud my vision. How could my own son do this? I printed the documents, each page feeling heavier than the last. These papers were proof of deception, manipulation, and greed. I sat back, eyes closed, breathing shallow. What could I do now? Call the bank, the police, confront Ebner directly. Each choice carried consequences I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Would I condemn my son to ruin, or let him continue to walk this dark path? Pearl's face appeared in my mind's eye, kind, wise, fair. She wouldn't stand for this deceit, but neither would she want a family torn apart. Determination stirred in me. This couldn't go unanswered. I resolved to face the bank that very day, to bring the truth to light, and to demand accountability. No matter the cost. The First National Bank stood imposing and familiar, yet alien in its modern trappings. Gone were the friendly tellers I once knew. Instead, glass partitions, computer screens, and suited men waiting to judge. I walked inside, briefcase in hand, clutching the papers that could break my son or save my family. The smell of polished wood and disinfectant reminded me of the post office where I'd spent decades delivering letters, bridging lives. Now, I was here to sever one. The receptionist directed me to Morton Higgs, head of mortgage lending. His expression was professional but unreadable. Beside him sat Alice Farrow from legal. "We take forgery seriously, Mr. Lamston," Higgs said as I sat. "Please tell us everything." I laid out the documents, pointing to the forged signature. "This is not mine. I never signed this loan. My son forged it to secure money for his business without my consent." Farrow examined the papers closely, then glanced at my real signatures for comparison. "It's clearly different," she said quietly. "Are you prepared to make an official statement?" Higgs asked. "Yes," I said firmly. "I want an investigation, and I want to withdraw my guarantee on this loan." Higgs frowned. "The mortgage guarantee is separate, but if there's proof of fraud on your son's part, we may renegotiate or revoke the agreement." I nodded. He violated our agreement by taking this loan without consent. The legal wheels began to turn. They explained the process: investigation, possible police involvement, suspension of loan disbursements. I felt a weight lift and settle all at once. It was justice, but it was also war. Before leaving, I proposed a compromise. I would continue guaranteeing the original mortgage, but under stricter terms, all payments to pass through me. They agreed. Walking out into the bright spring sun, I felt fragile and strong all at once. This fight was no longer private. It was official. Ebner would have to face the consequences of his choices. Ebner arrived 20 minutes later, his usual composure shattered. His hair was tousled, eyes rimmed red, and the sharp lines of his business suit softened by fatigue. "Come in," I said quietly, setting down a tray with tea. He hesitated, then stepped inside. The weight between us was heavier than the silence. "You ruined my life," he said bitterly as I poured tea into 2 chipped mugs. "I didn't ruin your life, Ebner," I replied evenly. "You put it in jeopardy." He paced the room, voice rising. "It was just a signature, a technicality. You turned it into a disaster." "No," I said firmly. "It's not just a signature, it's trust, crime, betrayal." His face twisted with frustration. "You see conspiracies everywhere. You don't trust me." "I do now," I said. I reminded him of the laxative at the party, the manipulation, the lies. He called me paranoid. I called him out. He confessed everything: the forgery, the desperation, the plan to force me out. For the first time, I saw not just anger but regret. "Why didn't you just ask?" I asked. "Why risk everything?" "I thought you'd say no," he admitted. "And you were wrong," I said, "but I'm still your father." He looked away, ashamed. "I want to help you, Ebner," I said, "but no more secrets, no more lies." He nodded, voice soft. "I'm sorry." That night I saw the boy who once rode his bike with scraped knees, the young man who stood beside me when Pearl died. Maybe this was a start. The house on Elm Street was more than walls and roof. It was every laugh, every tear, every moment Pearl and I shared. It was home. I sat by the window, watching the last light fade over Castleton. The streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. The wind stirred the curtains, soft as a sigh. Willow had called earlier, worried but hopeful. She promised to visit soon to help us heal. The family was fractured but maybe not beyond repair. I touched the photo of Pearl on the mantel. Her smile was warm, steady, a reminder of what mattered. Not contracts, not money, not grudges. Family. I had fought to keep my home, but more than that, I fought to keep our dignity. To remind my son and myself that love sometimes meant standing firm, even in pain. Tomorrow was uncertain, but I was ready. Because this was my house, my legacy. And I wasn't done yet. The next morning came quietly, as if the house itself knew the storm had passed but left things unsettled. Sunlight pushed through the curtains, touching the floor with soft gold. I stood in the kitchen, watching the kettle rumble on the stove, the same way Pearl used to. The silence wasn't empty today, it was full of thought. Ebner hadn't called yet. That didn't surprise me. What comes after an apology isn't always peace, it's space. Room for both people to see what remains of the bridge they tried to burn. Still, I believed that what we shared wasn't entirely gone. Fractured, yes, but maybe not finished. I spent the morning in the garden. The soil was ready for planting. My knees ached as I bent over the beds, pulling at weeds that had taken advantage of my distraction. There was something steadying about dirt under your fingernails, about touching something that doesn't lie, doesn't pretend, doesn't play power games. You plant, you water, you wait, and in time something grows. That's what I wanted, for something to grow again. Not just in the ground, but between me and my children, between me and the world. I'd spent years letting life slip quietly into a pattern of quiet meals and distant holidays. Maybe I'd done too much retreating. Maybe I'd let Pearl's death become the door I closed on everything else. Inside, I found the drawer in the hallway where she used to keep cards. Birthday, thank you, little notes for neighbors. I pulled out a blank one and wrote in it slowly, carefully. Lydia, thank you for your hug. It made Grandpa feel real again. I sealed the envelope and set it aside. I'd drop it off later. By the afternoon, the doorbell rang. It wasn't Ebner. It was Willow, holding a paper bag with takeout and a hesitant smile. Thought you might want company, she said. We ate on the back porch, watching the wind rattle through the trees. She didn't ask questions. She just sat with me, as she used to when she was a little girl and didn't know how to say what was on her mind, only that she didn't want to be alone. Eventually she spoke. He told me everything. I nodded. I'm angry, but mostly I'm just tired, she admitted. We all are. You still believe in him? I asked. She thought for a moment. I believe he's better than this, or he could be. That's a lot to carry. She looked at me. You carried all of us for a long time. Maybe it's our turn. I didn't say anything, just reached over and put my hand on hers. We sat like that until the sun dipped below the roof lines, until the wind cooled and the porch lights flicked on without anyone telling them to. When she left, I stayed there alone, long after darkness took the sky. Inside the house, in the quiet of the front hallway, I found myself stopping at the old dresser by the stairs. The mirror above it was spotted with age. My reflection looked like a man caught between generations, still standing, still here. There was a sound behind me. The door opened. Ebner stood there, holding Lydia's hand. She ran in first. You got my drawing. I smiled. Best mailbox surprise I've had in years. Ebner entered slower. His face was pale, his movements careful. He took off his shoes, walked over. He didn't speak at first, just looked at me, searching for the right words, and then he did something I didn't expect. He sat on the bench by the stairs, head bowed. "I messed up," he said, voice low. "Not just the forgery, not just the dinner, all of it." I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, saying nothing. "I was scared," he continued, "of failing, of disappointing my family, of not measuring up to you. That last one caught me off guard. To me, you built everything, the house, the family, the legacy. I couldn't even keep my business afloat without dragging your name into it. I thought, if I could just make it work, I could prove I was enough." I sat down across from him. "You were always enough, Ebner. You just didn't see it." He looked up, eyes glassy. "Is there any way back from this?" "There always is," I said. "But you have to walk it, not drag others down to make it easier." He nodded slowly. Lydia had disappeared into the living room, humming to herself. Ebner reached into his coat and pulled out a manila folder. "I canceled the loan," he said. "I'm finding another way. I'll make it right." I took the folder, opened it. Inside were the cancellation forms already notarized. He'd gone through with it. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. That night after they left, I walked through every room in the house. The wallpaper in the hallway, the dent in the banister, the little black smudge on the kitchen ceiling from that time Pearl overcooked the pot roast. This house wasn't just mine. It was the witness to all our flaws and all our healing. And it would stand like me, as long as it needed to. Not out of stubbornness, but out of love. And the simple, unshakable truth: some roots are worth protecting. Spring had fully settled in. I began spending more time on the porch, not to watch the time go by, but simply to be part of it. The air grew softer, the scent of soil richer, as if the world had finally exhaled after a long pause. A letter arrived the following week, handwritten in blue ink. The handwriting was bold, full of character, yet careful. I recognized it instantly. It was from Ebner. No stamps, no formal tone, no diplomacy. "Dad, I know words can't rebuild the trust I've broken, but I want you to know, I've seen things differently since that day. I saw what I've become. I saw the disappointment in your eyes, and that's something I never wanted to see. I'm grateful you gave me a chance to fix things. Not because I'm your son, but because you stayed human when I lost my way. Thank you, Lee." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside my bed, next to Pearl's old notes, Lydia's drawings, and cards from birthdays long gone. The things you can't measure, but you can feel. A few days later, signs of life returned to the yard. Lydia ran across the garden, building a fort from anything she could find. Ebner was out there too, installing a swing set in silence, his movements focused and respectful. Sometimes we exchanged glances, no need for words. They weren't necessary anymore. Willow brought over seedlings. We planted them together in the sunniest corner of the garden, the one where the sun held on longest. I gave her the patch where Pearl used to grow dill. It felt right. I started opening the windows more often, letting the air in, letting life in. At night, I'd sometimes hear the old radio in the kitchen playing static. No music, just the soft crackle of the airwaves, like the house was remembering something on its own. So we lived, without dramatic speeches, without final declarations, just lived. I knew there'd still be tensions, disagreements, maybe even new attempts at control. Old habits die hard. But now I knew I had a voice. I had this home, and if I had to stand my ground again, I would. Because sometimes, to protect love, you don't shield it, you make it grow again. Here in this house, on this land, with these people, and with a memory that no longer anchors you, but guides you. Yes, one day I will be gone, we all will. But as long as my hands can hold a shovel, as long as my eyes can trace the horizon, I'm here. Living. For real. Not for the past, but for what's still possible. The days stretched on, quietly weaving themselves into something resembling peace. The rhythm of the house returned, not the same as before, not the silence of grief or the tension of confrontation, but something calmer, something watchful. There was a new stillness inside me, a kind that doesn't come from giving up but from having faced something and lived through it. I had looked into the eyes of my own blood and seen the breaking point. I had watched trust shatter like glass. And yet, here I was, still sweeping the porch, still watering the garden, still standing in the kitchen waiting for the kettle to whistle. The simplest things became anchors. Each morning I walked the perimeter of the property the way I used to when the kids were little. Back then, I walked to check the fence, the soil, the tools left out in the yard. Now I walked to remind myself that I was still its keeper. This land, this structure, this legacy, it was still mine to watch over, not out of possession, out of devotion. Some days I saw Willow's car parked by the curb. She'd come to drop off groceries I didn't ask for, or check on the tomato plants she insisted would thrive this year. Other days, Lydia came bounding up the path with her arms full of crafts and wild stories, filling the house with color again. And then there were days when Ebner would appear, not often, not confidently, but he came. That alone meant something. He never stayed long. Sometimes he just helped me bring in the bins or patch a loose board on the back fence. But he didn't avoid my eyes anymore. He didn't try to sell me anything or persuade me toward a plan he'd cooked up without me. We spoke like men do when there's too much history and not enough language for it, quietly, in action more than words. One afternoon, while he held the ladder as I trimmed a stubborn branch from the old oak in the yard, he said, "Mom would have hated how far I took things." I looked down at him, sweat on my brow, bark under my fingernails. "She would have been heartbroken," I said, "but not surprised. You always wanted more than the world could give fast enough." He didn't respond, but his hands tightened on the ladder, keeping it steady. After the work was done, we sat on the porch. No tea, no whiskey, just silence and cicadas humming in the early summer heat. He told me about his business, how he downsized, taken on a partner, changed the name. A fresh start. Nothing dramatic, just honest shifts. No more shady loans, no forged promises. It wasn't redemption, but it was beginning to look like responsibility. At one point, he said something I hadn't expected. Something that didn't come dressed in guilt or wrapped in self-pity. "You were right not to leave this place. I see that now." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. That night I stood at the edge of the yard looking at the house. The porch light flickered, a bulb near the end of its life. I made a mental note to change it in the morning, the same way I'd been making mental notes for 40 years. The same way Pearl used to. Inside, I passed by her picture and felt the ache return, not sharp but deep, like the kind of wound that becomes part of your muscle memory. Love doesn't go away. It just changes shape. I didn't want revenge anymore. I didn't want the satisfaction of watching Ebner squirm. What I wanted now was simpler, purer, an honest life, one that didn't need to be defended every minute. And maybe, someday, a legacy that was more than bricks and inheritance fights. Something that outlived me. Not because it was valuable, but because it was meaningful. And I started to believe that was still possible. I kept living simply, kept mending what broke, kept waiting, not for the past to return, but for the future to show up as something better than I feared it might be. In time, the calls became more frequent, the visits more natural. Willow brought me to her church on Sundays now and then. I didn't much care for the sermons, but I liked the way she held my arm walking up the steps. I liked seeing her laugh, seeing Lydia fall asleep with crayons in her hands. On one visit, Ebner came alone. No briefcase, no tension. He handed me an envelope, inside it, a check made out to me, not the bank. A gesture, not a bribe. Call it rent, he said. I didn't cash it, but I kept it, folded neatly in the back of the same drawer with his apology letter. We never truly returned to who we were, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe what matters is who we are now and the fact that despite everything, despite poison, papers, and all that went unsaid, we're still here. Still trying. Still family. Summer pressed in gently, wrapping the town in long days and quiet evenings. The crickets returned, and with them, a kind of rhythm that made the world feel older and slower, closer to what it used to be before everything got so loud and fast. In the evenings, I found myself sitting on the porch long after the sun had dipped behind the hills. I didn't keep the radio on much anymore. The silence didn't scare me the way it used to. It was comforting now, like a warm coat that had finally started to fit again. One evening, Lydia climbed into the chair beside me with a handful of dandelions. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at the horizon like I did. "Do you ever miss Grandma?" she asked suddenly. I nodded slowly, "Every day." She looked down at the flowers, then picked one apart piece by piece, watching the fluff float into the air. "Do you think she'd be mad at Daddy?" she asked. I turned to her. Her eyes were wide, serious. Too serious for a child, but then again, children always understand more than we give them credit for. "No," I said, "but she'd be disappointed." She nodded, as if that answer made sense in a way only a granddaughter could understand. "But she'd still love him," I added. "Even when we do wrong, love doesn't stop, it just waits for us to do better." Lydia smiled, then leaned her head on my arm. We sat there like that, watching the last of the dandelion seeds float away into the golden light. Later that week, I finally went up to the attic. It had been years. I hadn't stepped foot up there since Pearl passed. The dust, the cobwebs, the closed boxes, they had all grown like armor over the memories I wasn't ready to face. But something inside me shifted. I didn't want to avoid anymore. I wanted to remember, not to hurt but to honor. The attic was as I had left it, untouched and heavy with the weight of time. I opened one box at a time. Pearl's college books, the old quilt her mother made, a stack of letters tied in twine, the ones we exchanged when I worked nights at the post office and she stayed home with the children. Her handwriting danced across the pages, still alive somehow. The way she curled her Y.S., the way she dotted her I.S. a little higher than most. One letter caught me by surprise. I didn't remember it. It was dated the week before our 30th anniversary. She must have written it and never given it to me. "Ward, sometimes I look at you across the table, and I still see the boy who carried his mailbag like it was filled with treasure. You always delivered with purpose, even when no one noticed. I notice. I know you worry about the kids, about the house, about me. You carry us all like you carry that bag. I hope one day when the house is quieter and the porch creaks a little louder, you know you did well. You gave us roots. You gave us steadiness. You gave us you. That's more than I ever asked for. P. I sat there holding that letter until the sun coming through the attic window had changed to evening gold. I didn't cry, not in the way I used to, but something inside me eased, like a long-held breath finally let go. I carefully placed the letter in a new envelope and brought it downstairs, set it beside her photo, lit the small candle we used to keep for holidays. Outside, the wind picked up slightly. It rustled the garden, shook the wind chimes, made the old trees hum. And I felt it not like a ghost, not like a sign, just a presence. A steadiness. A sense that I wasn't alone. Not in this house. Not in this life. Not in what comes after. I went to bed that night with the windows open, the curtains fluttering gently, the sounds of summer drifting in. The house creaked and settled as if exhaling, as if saying, "We're still standing." And we were. The weeks drifted on, each one softer than the last, like a tide slowly washing away the jagged edges left behind by everything that had happened. I moved through the days with more presence, more patience. I found peace in the little rituals, tightening the porch rail that had come loose in the storm, oiling the hinges of the garden gate, sweeping dust from the baseboards with Pearl's old broom. There was a steadiness to life again, not without its shadows but no longer ruled by them. Some mornings, I'd wake before the sun and just sit at the kitchen table with a warm mug between my hands, listening to the sounds of the house as it stirred. The ticking of the old clock, the distant groan of pipes. Even silence had begun to feel full, not empty. One Saturday I found myself in town, running errands I'd once let pile up. The grocer greeted me by name, asked about the garden. At the hardware store, the clerk mentioned how good it was to see me more often these days. I hadn't realized how much I'd withdrawn, not until I started returning. On my way back, I passed the old park where I used to take Ebner and Willow as kids. I pulled the car over without thinking. The swing set was still there, though the paint was new. I walked slowly, gravel crunching underfoot, and sat on the same bench Pearl and I had once shared so many times before. From that spot I could see everything, the winding trail, the duck pond, the picnic tables. Ghosts of memories played out in quiet flickers, Willow chasing pigeons, Ebner trying to climb the jungle gym before he was big enough, Pearl reading a book barefoot in the grass. I stayed there until the sun shifted and the trees cast long shadows across the playground. There was something comforting in returning to places that had held our laughter, our beginnings. They didn't demand anything. They just existed, quiet and constant. That evening, I received a message from Ebner. Asterisk, can we talk? Just does tomorrow? Asterisk. I responded simply, asterisk, yes, come by around 4. Asterisk. He arrived on time, dressed simply. No briefcase, no polished shoes, no mask. Just a man carrying the weight of his choices, trying to walk a little lighter now. We sat in the living room, the room that had witnessed so much of our unraveling. He didn't touch his coffee. Neither did I. He began slowly, careful with each word. I'm not here to fix everything. I don't think I can, but I'm trying, Dad, really trying. I've made mistakes that I'll carry for the rest of my life, but I'm not running from them anymore. I listened, let him speak without interruption. I've been seeing someone, a counselor. Business is smaller now, steadier, less pressure. I've got time to think about who I was becoming, who I want to be instead. He looked up at me, and there was something new in his eyes. Humility, yes, but also sincerity. I think I got so focused on trying to be successful, trying to prove something, that I forgot who I was supposed to be successful for. I forgot about the kind of man I wanted Lydia to see. I nodded quietly. She still believes in you, I said. So does Willow, so do I, but believing is the easy part. You have to keep earning it. I know, he whispered. We sat in silence after that, the kind of silence that no longer felt hostile. It felt like a resting place, like standing on the other side of a storm and seeing that the land still stretches out ahead. Before he left, he turned at the door. Thank you for not giving up on me. You had every reason to. I stood. I didn't do it for you, I said. I did it because I know what it feels like to lose too much too quickly, and I wasn't ready to lose my son too. He nodded, eyes glassy, and walked out into the fading day. The house was quiet again. But this time, the quiet didn't press down. It wrapped around me like a blanket worn thin but familiar. Later that night, I opened the back door and stepped into the garden. The stars were bright. The wind was calm. I walked past the tomato vines, past the trellis where Pearl used to train the roses. I knelt by the edge of the bed where Lydia had planted wildflowers earlier in the summer. They were growing strong. As I brushed the soil from my hands, I realized something simple and profound. Some stories don't end. They unfold. Slowly, patiently, quietly. like roots stretching deeper beneath the surface, finding what they need, becoming something stronger. And this was the part of life where the roots began to bloom again. The nights grew cooler as autumn began its slow march across the fields. I found myself wrapping a wool blanket around my shoulders on the porch, the one Pearl knitted so long ago. The smell of wood smoke drifted from neighbors' chimneys, and somewhere a dog barked in the distance. It felt as if the world had settled into a softer pace again. One morning I woke to frost on the windows and a lone crow calling overhead. I moved through my routine, breakfast of oatmeal and tea, checking the garden one last time, realizing that this season too had its own beauty. The tomatoes had ripened scarlet and full, and the wildflowers Lydia planted still bobbed their heads in the breeze. I gathered what remained in baskets, preparing jars of preserves that would see us through winter. Each jar felt like a promise, of warmth, of continuity, of small comforts in dark months. Ebner came by later that day. He walked to the back door with a careful step, carrying something wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a framed photo of Pearl. He'd found it tucked into a box in his own attic, the one I never looked inside. He placed it gently on the porch table. "I thought it belonged here," he said, and for once I heard the sincerity beneath his words. We didn't need more discussion. The photo would watch over us exactly where Pearl would have wanted, reminding us of what held a family together longer than any argument or mistake. That evening, Willow and Lydia joined us for dinner in the kitchen, the warmth of the stove, the steam rising from bowls of stew. The three of us sat close, talking quietly about plans for Thanksgiving, about the children's school projects, about nothing and everything. The shadows in the corners were friendlier now, as if the house itself was exhaling a contented sigh. After they left, I lingered by the window, watching tail lights fade down Elm Street. I realized that time had smoothed the fractures, but it hadn't erased them, and that was all right. Wounds don't vanish. They become part of who we are. They remind us of lessons learned, of love tested and sometimes stretched to breaking, but ultimately held together. I turned off the kitchen light and walked to my bedroom, passing the hallway clock that ticked steadily into the night. Tomorrow I'd begin winter chores, stacking firewood, sealing windows, gathering supplies. But tonight I'd rest in the quiet company of memories and hope. Before closing my eyes, I whispered into the darkness, "We're still here." And in that moment it was enough. Spring's first thaw came with a drizzle, turning frost to rivulets that trickled down the window panes. I woke to the soft patter of rain and the promise of renewal. The garden beds lay dormant, their last year's blooms buried beneath mounds of earth, waiting for their cue to awaken. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat by the window, watching the world soften. Ebner arrived unexpectedly, holding 2 steaming mugs on a small tray. He didn't knock. He simply eased the door open and stepped in, careful not to startle me. He placed the tray on the kitchen table and offered me a mug. The rich aroma of fresh grounds filled the room, warming it before the liquid did. "We thought you might like company," he said quietly. His voice had lost its old edge. It carried a gentleness I hadn't known in years. We sipped our coffee in companionable silence, each of us finding comfort in the shared ritual. That afternoon, we ventured into the garden together. I showed him where I'd left the tulip bulbs, and he cleared away winter debris without prompt. The soil was still cold beneath our fingers, but beneath the surface, life stirred. Growing things understood time differently than people. They didn't rush. They simply grew when the season was right. Willow and Lydia joined us at dusk, the latter running through rows of bare stems, imagining the flowers that would someday bloom. Their laughter echoed across the yard, filling spaces that had once felt too empty. I leaned on the handle of my spade and watched. This was the renewal I'd longed for, not just in the earth but in the hearts of my family. Inside, we shared a simple meal of soup and bread. The stove's heat and the scent of baking bread made the kitchen feel like a sanctuary. Lydia sat at the table, carefully tearing chunks of crust, and Willow poured us tea. Conversation flowed easily, stories of work, of school, of small triumphs and mistakes. No mention of old wounds, no need to revisit past betrayals. They lived in the past. Tonight was about the present. Later, as night settled in, I stood near the doorway watching their retreating backs as they left. The porch light cast their shadows long across the boards. I closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling softly. The house felt full of life, of sound, of warmth. It had become more than a refuge. It was home again. In the following weeks, early spring flowers began to peek through dark soil. Snowdrops, crocuses, their small heads shining against the earth. I knelt beside them one morning, brushing soil from their petals, and felt a swell of gratitude. The cycles of nature, death giving way to life, endings birthing beginnings, mirrored the journey I'd taken. Loss had given way to healing. Brokenness had given way to growth. Life settled into a new rhythm. I returned to my daily tasks, tending the garden, caring for the house, keeping watch over every crack and creak. But now I did so with other footsteps around me. Ebner stopped by more often, sometimes reluctant, sometimes full of questions about how to prune a rose bush or where to store tools. Willow invited me to join her at community events, and I discovered the simple joys of belonging once more. Lydia brought me drawings of imagined gardens where flowers bloomed in every color, reminding me that hope often springs from a child's imagination. One evening, I found a note pinned to the bulletin board by the front door. In Lydia's careful handwriting, it read, Asterisk, can we plant a sunflower field this summer? L. Asterisk, I smiled and set about gathering sunflower seeds, already picturing the tall golden stalks swaying in the breeze. As summer approached, I felt the seasons moving in my own heart, too. The old ache of loss remained, a soft echo rather than a sharp grief. Memories of Pearl came not as pangs of pain, but as blessings, guides showing me what mattered most. I planted the sunflowers in a long row along the fence, and as they grew, they stood sentinel, luminous faces turned toward the sun. And through it all, the house on Elm Street stood steady, its windows reflecting the changing light, its rooms filled with footsteps and laughter. The legacy I'd feared losing revealed itself not in the bricks and mortar, but in the renewal of love, the resilience of family, and the endless possibility of new beginnings.